In this episode of the Creator Podcast, we're going to talk about the most interesting technologies that we're going to watch in 2017. Stay tuned. Welcome, Creator fans. I'm your host, Josh, along with my co-host,
Ben Dogood.
Welcome to the show, Ben.
Hey.
It's our last show of the year.
Yeah.
Like 2 days time, it'll be 2017. Woo-hoo.
Been a crazy year.
Yeah, it's definitely been a crazy year. So rather than necessarily like recap the crazy year, I thought we could do like an end of year episode where we talk about like what we think the future is going to be. We could probably mention a little bit of the craziness up front. Certainly like in the grand scheme of things, it seems like the world's gone nutso with Britain leaving Europe and like Trump getting elected, even though no one thought he would get elected. Like it's been kind of crazy.
Well, and JavaScript fatigue.
And JavaScript fatigue. That's right. That did happen this year.
Yeah.
Like that feels so old, but that I feel like that was maybe in February or March or something. But yeah, you're totally right. Like we totally got that new JavaScript fatigue meme.
Yeah.
Can't talk today.
Yeah, a lot of stuff happened.
Yeah, man, I don't know. Like maybe closer to the hearts of the creator community is like Meteor's seen a weird shift, right? And we've done a couple shows on that. Certainly been a little controversial as of late. We've seen Airnoda leave the community, the Meteor community, and even yesterday he made a post that they're shutting down Kadira. But they're doing it in an awesome way, right? Like he's open sourcing all the code, and then you'll be able to do your own deployable version of Kadira, which is quite funny because it's like the thing was a DevOps challenge for them.
Yeah.
So I've got to imagine running your own is going to be hard. Like you want Insight to help your app stay up, but you're going to have to debug and help the app tracking app stay up.
You need Insight for your Insight. Yeah, he built his own database, didn't he?
I don't think so. They were talking about it. I don't know if they ever did. I think they were still using Mongo, but they had to like the data collector was like fronted in Node, and then like they had their own. They weren't using Mongo sharding, but they were sharding on their own in software land. So like if your app started with an A, you went here. If it started with a B, you went to this Mongo shard. Essentially, really just separate databases.
Gotcha.
Theoretical sharding, I guess.
Cool. All right.
So yeah, I don't know. It's been a fun year though. Like we've seen the rise of things like GraphQL. Like that definitely was not really on my radar at the beginning of the year.
And Apollo along with that from Meteor.
Yeah, definitely. Saw some exciting stuff coming out from them. Like they're getting Vue integration. I don't know. I'm super excited for 2017 and where it's heading. And like honestly, I think if you want to know like where my head's at with where technology is going to be, I've finally got the CreatorConf JavaScript edition up for 2017. I've got 8 of the speakers listed. I actually have 10 speakers, so I'm going to put 2 more up today, and then I still have 2 slots I have to fill, but we're getting there. And I think a lot of the technology that we're going to mention today is a lot like I've purposely gone out and picked some speakers for a lot of this stuff as well for the conference, because I just think like that's where things are heading, and it's going to be super exciting and interesting. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it should be fun.
Yeah, definitely. So let's dive into it. I think for me, the number one thing that I kind of learned about this year and was excited to learn about was serverless, right? So like AWS Lambda on the back end, and serverless gives you an easy way to take your node code and deploy it directly to AWS Lambda. And so like it's not clear to me. Is it considered a framework? I mean,
I'm pretty sure it's a framework. Serverless, I think it's serverless.org, right?
serverless.com.
.com. I was wrong. Yeah, I know that they plan to support Windows functions because, like, at this point, I know Google has their Google Cloud Functions, I believe it's called, and Windows has, or Microsoft has Azure Functions. Yeah, so they're all functions as a service, is what people call it. So basically, you just code out one endpoint, and I mean, pretty typically, I don't even know if serverless supports Java stuff. I know it does Node stuff, and I think they all do Node and Java, maybe Python as well, but I'm not too sure about that.
Yeah, so I mean, to me, like I got to see actually a double helping of it at Space Camp, and I've got some videos that I can get up shortly. But I was super excited to just see like how easy it is to work, right? So like for me, one of the tools I use all the time in my business is Zapier, and I feel like AWS Lambda and serverless is like Zapier on steroids, right? Like it's just like this. You have even more access and even more code available to you to run to like execute these things, and so you're building little functions that have like inputs and then they run some code and then maybe they have some output, right? And the interesting thing they were showing is like um, messaging back and forth in one of these talks, and it was like they were taking inputs from Twilio through SMS and then inputting it into a DynamoDB and then outputting that onto a web page. So like that was super interesting to me. And then like you had to go both ways, right? Like if someone put something into the web, then that needed to like go into Lambda and then shoot back out over Twilio SMS. And so I see it as almost like an if this then that or Zapier or something like that, like just with way more power behind it.
Yeah, because you essentially have, I mean, every API is just its own function. So I think it makes a lot of sense, which we'll talk about later as far as we'll get to GraphQL. But I think GraphQL is a perfect candidate for something like Lambda because it's one endpoint. And
Yeah.
so you could have your GraphQL API, just hide behind AWS and then connect to various AWS services. Or again, it's not, serverless is not only AWS, but you could connect GraphQL to all the various things on the server side. And I think that that's really cool. And from my understanding, it seems really easy to deploy and play with all of the serverless stuff. And again, that's kind of the goal of the serverless framework is to make that just really simple, as well as
Yeah,
customizable.
yeah, and they talked about that during that talk too that I got to see. It was like AWS Lambda, like the packaging format and the way that you deployed it was really kind of awkward and weird. And so I think that was like the first win with something like JAWS, which then became serverless, is that it made it like super easy to start deploying to AWS Lambda. And I get to watch like they actually changed a little bit of code and did a deploy like live real time during the talk, and like it was super simple. Almost reminded me of something like a Heroku or Modulus or even Galaxy. Like you just do kind of a simple code push kind of thing, and then it's up there and running. So pretty
Yeah, I
awesome.
think there's so many AWS, as far as the AWS side, there's so many services. There's some page which translate them all because they all have wonky names, or just not super intuitive names. And I thought it was funny, but there's just listen, they have it all. It seems like. So one of the things that I've played with a little bit of Lambda is the IoT button. I don't know if you've seen, they have their Amazon Dash buttons, which essentially, so I've got a Gatorade one, and I just push it, and 2 days later, Gatorade appears at my door, which is cool. Or
Yeah,
razors or shaving cream, whatever you need, toilet paper, fun
yeah.
stuff. But they have the same button, only it's programmable. So it hits some AWS Lambda API, and then you could do whatever you want. So I think that's pretty interesting for prototyping some ideas and stuff. So
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think in this day and age, like it's super cheap to deploy to Lambda, right? Like they give you a ton of credit up front, and like you really have to, I think, have something popular to drive it over the limits of what you get up front. And like the interesting thing to me is in the day and age of like the Echo Dot or the Big Echo or Google Home or anything like that, like we now need ways to have functional APIs that can like respond to incoming requests from things like Alexa and then respond to it with the kind of information that you want. And like I saw an example. Someone got a Google Home, and they wanted to be able to say like, they have 3 kids, and like all 3 kids have to do the dishes, and they want to have a rotation. And so he just wants to be able to say like, whose turn is it? And then say they just did their turn. And so then it like rotates through. And like, I think this is another example of like, it's just going to be super easy to just write some scripts and deploy it to something like AWS Lambda and get it all working with Echo or Google Home. And that's super exciting.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting. I think, yeah, it's just cool. So as far as the cost aspect of serverless, I guess we probably should have started with a little bit of how it works. But essentially, AWS, they have all these web servers and everything, and they just take the unused cycles, and that's how they're able to process your Lambda requests just super fast. So they have all these. So you want them to be really fast, and then they're just super cheap. So I know at one point I was listening to CodePen's podcast, and they were talking about they converted a lot of their stuff to use Lambda instead, as far as like transpiling code, less SAS, Babel, that type of stuff. And for almost all of them, the costs went way down. So I don't know, it's pretty cool. And I think in 2017, a lot more exploration and serverless stuff will be done. It's exciting.
Yeah, I think it's gonna super explode on the scene this year and become a pretty major thing. And you're right. Like I think it's the comparison that you're going from paying like, if you think way back in the old days, you had to buy a server and put it in a rack and like connect it to the internet, and that's how you got servers going. And then we started to get into the cloud, right? And that was the ability to just go hit a button on a website and it would provision your server. And now like we're just saying, forget all that. I just want a function to run when something gets hit. I don't care where it runs, how it runs, just get it done, right? You give me an endpoint, you run some code, it does what I need it to do, and we're done. And I'm paying you by the second for what's running, essentially. So
yeah,
it's just further chopping up the cost of the server, I suppose, smaller and smaller.
Yes, and I think that it increases developer experience.
It does.
Okay.
It does. Nice.
Which is the second thing we're going to talk about. So there's been a ton of stuff this year. We've seen the rise of webpack, kind of, I guess we could say, beating all the other build system or module loaders. I would say
fair-ish, I guess.
Yeah. There's still others out there, and I think it's good that we have competition and an open source collaboration. So I don't want them to go away. Things like Rollup and Browserify would be some of the other alternatives, but a lot of other stuff has popped up. So it's cool to see. But Webpack is awesome, and I think they're on the 3rd release candidate of Webpack 2, which I know for a while was held back by just the docs, and then they released the docs site. I'm pretty sure it's just webpack.js.org. And if you haven't seen the new docs, so if you've seen the old docs and haven't checked out the new docs, go check it out. Because the old docs, you have to be like a level 55 wizard to translate them. It's just like what was happening. The new docs are awesome. Huge shout out to Sean Larkin. If you don't follow him on Twitter, you should, because he's funny and he just webpacks all the things. So it's great.
Yeah, I loved it. Like I was digging through Next.js stuff, and like they were talking about being able to customize Webpack in there, and like he just showed up in the comments of an issue. Like I don't even think anyone summoned him. It was just like someone's talking about Webpack. Here I am.
Yeah, that's impressive. There's a bunch of funny tweets where he will just spend a lot of his time just searching the hashtag Webpack as well as, I guess, just regular Webpack. And so if anybody tweets about it, he either likes or comments it in like within like 20 minutes. Like the guy is incredible. He's just always out there lurking the Webpack Twitter. We're gonna I guess the GitHub issues Twitter.
I'm gonna tweet now and we'll check at the end.
That'd be pretty funny. Yeah, he's awesome. And so there's other stuff as far as DevX. I think Babel, as far as transpilers, is pretty much one, and they've done a ton of work there. I don't know. There was a history and state of Babel blog post the other day, and I think that some super cool stuff is coming down the pipeline. Like if you've seen the Babel preset environment where you only need to, you give it a little config, like, okay, Chrome, the last 2 versions, Firefox, last 2 versions, and
Oh, really?
Edge or whatever, and it'll only transpile the features that need to be transpiled. Or
Ah,
Node, it can even transpile for Node too, which I think is super cool.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, definitely. Like I haven't like that's one of those under the covers things I haven't had to mess a whole lot with, but I did kind of brush up against it. I've been playing with Jest lately for testing, particularly like some behind the scenes worker stuff that I've been working on for a client. And um, like it's built in Meteor for now. It's somewhat portable in the future, perhaps, because we're relying on a lot of Node libraries. But like I needed to do a lot of we're basically using ES6, right? Because that's like free out of the box of Meteor. And like I didn't like Jest doesn't work with Babel out of the box. Like I had to go put in, I had to go add a couple node modules to the dev dependencies and then add a Babel RC. I mean, it was a one-liner. It was no big deal, but like it was so super simple to just get up and running, like just done. Like it was translating my ES6 for me.
I think that's more of Meteor being, this just does all the ECMAScript stuff. I think the ECMAScript package, it just does all the Babel stuff for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, Babel RC should play nice with most things.
Yes, and it did, and it was great. So
Yeah.
super happy with that. And I just think like in general, the direction that programming's heading in terms of the developer experience, I think is getting better and better. Like I love I don't think I could survive without the React Chrome extension add-on, right? Or like the GraphQL stuff or Redux tools or anything like that. Like it's so amazing that you can just like pop these into the Chrome browser and like they just kind of work out of the box, and I'm able to get way more insight than I would through maybe just a console.log. Like I can really dig into these things. And I think that I love that trend, and I hope that that continues in the future. Super, super excited about that.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff like even for debugging performance and the React, whatever version we're on. Are we on 16? 15 or 16? Whatever the latest one is. There was a blog post on the browser's console.time API.
Yeah,
It just plugs right into the perf, and I think that is so cool because if you're trying to figure out, okay, which of my components are wasting extra time or wasting time, yeah, it's really easy. And I think the easier it is to debug performance and debug bugs, the faster, the more productive we are, the more we're able to ship, and so
yeah, definitely, yeah. And I mean, it's not just like React stuff necessarily either. Like Chrome has done a good job. Like I haven't looked at Safari in terms of like measuring performance, but I did, like I've got a bunch of stuff ready for a blog post about like the dangers of SSR. And like I did a lot of measuring on my local machine to try to figure out like, everyone says like, oh, do SSR, it's going to be way faster. But in the end, it really wasn't faster. Like spoiler alert for my blog post, it wasn't any faster. You're really just translating whose CPU cycles you're using, right? Either the browsers or the servers. And the way I was measuring this is like, a lot of people will be like, well, when you're delivering rendered HTML to the browser, it just feels like it's loading faster. And so I ended up using window.performance to like test the timing of like getting, the request being sent to the server and getting a usable page back. And like, there's a lot of stuff in there that you can play around with and get timings out of. And it's super interesting. And you can do a lot of performance diving just straight in Chrome. Like you don't even have to mess around with a lot of things. So I think that, that stuff's getting better and better every year too.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing there is just being aware of, having these timings set up and logged, and I guess just performance testing really, and actually knowing the data. Because if you don't know how fast your app is to time to interactive or those types of things, you don't even know how well it's performing. So yeah, I think we'll see that shift. I think it has been shifting more. There's been a lot of just developer evangelism coming out of the Chrome team for these things. And I've seen some cool webpack stuff coming from them too, like the what is it called? They try to tell you, hey, this bundle's too big. You should try code splitting that more aggressively. And I think the rise of HTTP2 and those things will continue to change the boundaries and change the landscape of web stuff. So we'll
Yeah,
see.
definitely, definitely. And I think, to me, you know, shoot, I forget what I was going to say. Um, yeah, I think like it's definitely, you're right. Like that's one of the reasons why like I'm so excited about Next.js now, is because it's got like code splitting, it's got SSR, like it's got all those things built in, and it's using Webpack on other covers, and it's been like a super great experience. So I'm sneaking Next.js in here as like a good developer experience as well. Something you should check out.
I mean, I would check out all the Zeet. Is it Zeet or Zeit?
Zeit, yeah, I always
Right?
assume Zeit, like Zeitgeist, or
Yeah, I always say Zeet, but now I don't know. So yeah, Next.js came from that team as well as
yeah.
Hyper, the terminal, which I think is super cool. It's
I like it. I don't. Have you used it?
I've used it some, and the emoji thing was kind of annoying. I hopped on it right when it came out because at this time we were using Redux and React, and I was like, "A Redux and React terminal, like we're just JavaScripting everything. This is amazing."
Why not?
And why not? And Jeff Atwood's law, we got to JavaScript everything. But yeah, and I've seen some interesting performance things where it actually performs better than some of the terminals. And I know now it works on Windows as well when they released the 1.0 version.
Yeah.
And emojis should be way better now, as well as some of the like the double character stuff where you wanted like accents on your A's and stuff. Those were a little weird at first, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think those all work now. And
Yeah. There's still performance issues, so it has to do with like how they're buffering. I think for like when a lot of data is coming in. Basically, like if you go cat like a million line file, like you're gonna kill Hyper. Whereas with like iTerm, it still works.
okay,
So something to be aware of. Like that's the one thing that's stopped me from really like jumping on Hyper full time. But yeah, I totally agree. Like that team is just killing it in my opinion, with all the stuff that they're putting out. So definitely worth a look. And now .sh, like deploying to that thing,
yeah.
that may have been the easiest thing I've done all year. It's ridiculous, but
Yeah, and they just keep sharing. Next now, there's a bunch of stuff, and it's super cool. There's even a. I was going to start this if it wasn't a thing, but a Zeet or Zeit dash awesome, or just a list of all the cool things, and I was like, oh, this is beautiful. So go check that out. It's amazing. But
nice.
ZEIT, right?
Yes.
What it is. So pretty cool.
Yeah. So I think our other big topic, it's not like focused on one specific technology. I guess it's like focused on smartphones, but we're going to talk a little bit about mobile. I don't know. I don't know where this is going to end up in 2017. I don't know what it's going to look like. I think React Native will continue to grow. We're certainly seeing things like React VR, and stuff like that. Like I think that that's just going to continue to push the boundaries of like what React is doing and like what React Native can do for you. I think is going to be super interesting. But I think that there's no consensus here, right? Like someone I tweeted out like what do people want to talk about, and someone mentioned they wanted us to talk about like PWAs, and like I just don't know, like are PWAs gonna be a thing? Like
What
Google.
is a PWA?
Yeah, I guess we could talk about that. Progressive web app, right? So it's this idea that like you can hit a web page and you're going to download a service worker and start downloading some assets, basically to a phone, and you can have it's like a pseudo app, right? Like it's still right there on the web page. You hit the web page, but now like it can function as an app. And so if you think back to like way back in the day, you can say like save a web page as a button on your home screen for iOS or something like that. Like it's along those lines. Like you can then save that app to your phone and bring it up, and there's some code that is installed on your phone, but it's like it's still like all handled. It's not done through the App Store anymore necessarily. And like I'm super interested in the idea. I certainly like there's definitely security concerns because I don't want to necessarily download and run code on my phone that's coming from someone just because I hit their website, like that seems potentially dangerous. I think there is an install process. Like I haven't played with a PWA to be honest. Have you?
Do you have an iPhone?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
That's
Yeah, I
probably
think
why.
iOS and Safari are kind of, I think, holding that back on the Apple side. And
Yeah.
yeah, Safari in general, I don't even know if it supports Service Worker. I know I've seen a lot of people hit on Safari for not even talking about service workers and trying to just not acknowledge them. But I've seen it appear in their plans, at least mentioned. So I don't know exactly what's happening with that. Are you checking can I use?
Yeah, I was just service worker ready.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah, I'm
you're
not
right.
sure.
It's under consideration, brief positive signals in 5-year plan.
Yeah, that's right. That's where I saw it.
Yeah.
I looked a little. Yeah, so I have played with PWAs in there because I have an Android phone.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's there's some algorithm, and I don't know how I feel about the algorithm. I feel like it should appear the first time, but maybe the first time is annoying. So I think if you visit it, last time I heard about the algorithm, it was like if you visit a website twice within like a 2 week period, the second time it'll be like a little banner pops up from the bottom. It says, "Do you want to add to home screen?" No thanks, or sure. And I think the only one I actually have added is Ponyfoo. They do some blog posts and stuff,
Yeah.
and it basically just looks. I mean, it's just a Chrome tab without the. I think you can specify there's a JSON file or a manifest file, and so you can specify some options about it as far as like the name and the icon and stuff. It's pretty straightforward, but yeah, it appears as just like a URL list, just web page, and so it
Yeah.
can look like a native app.
That almost makes me think of Cordova, right? Like the same thing. I think Cordova is built on, whatever browser technology the phone has as far as just displaying it as a web page. And then under the covers, it's just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript kind of functioning. And you don't have that URL bar like you're talking about,
Yeah,
And you just kind of build out an HTML app, and you gotta be a little more careful because you gotta make sure that like when you're linking to things, there's a way to get back to like a main screen or home screen if you
yeah,
need it. So you're
yeah,
not getting stuck in the app. But yeah, like I think that's super interesting, and I'm excited by the idea. I'd love to see Safari maybe say they're going to do it, or Apple come out and say, yeah, we're going to support it in iOS. But there's definitely been, like, as far as I know, nothing talked about there. And they have a cash cow that they want to protect, right, in the App
yeah,
Store. And this would allow you to potentially skirt the App Store. And I think there are security concerns, like, someone let my parents freely browse the internet, and now their machines are full of viruses and malware and all kinds of things, right?
yeah. But I mean, at the same time, you could go click download on anything. So
True,
I
but
mean,
I mean, there's at
maybe
least
it is a little easier.
there is a review process, right? Like they're at a 5-day turnaround. Like it's probably even better than that now, but app store review time.
Oh, the App Store. Yeah, I've heard they've gotten a lot better.
There you go. 2 days on iOS and 2 days on Mac. So um, the average right now being reported, which is pretty fast. But at the same time, like I think they're running some static code analysis tools and kind of poking through and looking for any red flags. And certainly things skate through. Like there were instances where like malware got into like some library and got into some popular apps, and like that still sailed through the app store. But at the same time, like they did catch it. I think, when you remove that app store review process, I don't know. I feel like we're removing some layer of security. I don't know.
Maybe a little, but I think the biggest advantage of PWA is, so other than having that that home screen icon, and then service worker in general. So you have all this offline support. So I've heard a lot of people, because we're in this age of the use the platform stuff where people are like, oh, you don't even need JavaScript frameworks, and there's different ways of optimizing. And I think as we see, Facebook and Google and some of these companies really try to bring on, because I forget the number, but there's still like a billion people, or there's a lot of people who still don't have access to internet. And as we see these kind of developing countries, developing areas come online, the network is going to be the biggest issue.
Mm-hmm.
So optimizing over the network with things like GraphQL, so you deliver the minimum payload, as well as that layer of caching that service workers and PWAs can provide, I think is a pretty huge advantage. And again, I think this is something we'll see more prevalent in 2017. So it's exciting stuff.
For sure. Hopefully Google and Apple can get along.
Hopefully.
That'll make it better for everybody. Speaking of, GraphQL and like minimal like data, like, I want to describe the data I want to make one request and I want to get it back. And that's very much what GraphQL is good for. And you alluded to it earlier, like we have one endpoint with which we connect and ask for the data, and we may provide the data that it needs to gather what we want, and then it'll go out and do what it needs to do and then bring it back to us in the format that we need. And I think, in all my days of developing and working with APIs, I think back to like my days of like working with the Twitter API, and you'd make a call and like get some information about a Twitter account, and then you get some IDs, and then you take those IDs and you have to go make further calls to get the data you really cared about. So you had to make 2 or 3 calls to really get to the stuff you cared about. And then you have to paginate through that. The idea that GraphQL can solve that, to where I'm just saying like, here's a person and I need to get all their follower IDs. I no longer have to make 2 or 3 calls. I'm just making like the one call. So I think that's definitely like where it's positioned itself. And I think it becomes interesting to me because, one of the things I always loved about Meteor and DDP was that DDP kind of became this fulcrum point, right? Like it's a point at which you could shift into a different technology if you needed to. And so on the front end, we're just making a GraphQL call, but on the GraphQL server, it's handling things behind the scenes how it needs to. You need Mongo? Great, use Mongo. You want to use Node to build your GraphQL server? Use Node. You want to use Ruby? Absolutely, use Ruby instead, or Elixir, or Phoenix, if that makes sense. Like, you can build however you want on the back end, and the front end is still querying in the same way, and you're still returning data in the format that it needs, and you don't have to worry about that back end anymore.
Yeah. GraphQL is super cool. And then the other thing, my favorite part of GraphQL is once you've played with Graphical, which is their dev tooling, it's like I never want to go back to anything else. So Graphical, it's like SQL servers, developer tools or whatever, where you can explore the docs of all of your graph API, and then you can just ask for whatever you want, and then you can get that. So while you're developing, you're like, okay, I think that this field has this and stuff. You can just see it right in the dev tool.
Yeah.
Where you're like, okay, let's use Postman, and like I don't remember exactly what that data has, but you have to actually send the HTTP GET request, or you have to send a post, but maybe you don't remember all the fields the post has. So previously you had to go actually look in the API code, and now it's just all exposed to you in GraphQL. I think that after doing that, it's like I don't want to go back to things like Postman and that stuff. I mean, Postman's great, but I'm a huge fan of Graphical. And I think there's even a Chrome extension now, which has, or maybe that was the Apollo DevTools client. It has Graphical in there, as well as your like a subscriptions viewer, so you can see what you subscribe to. Interesting stuff. So again, going back to DevX in 2016, I think we'll see these things get even better, which is exciting.
Yeah. I'm super excited about it. Like, I mentioned Ruby. I still have like, coming from Ruby, like doing like 9 years of work with Ruby development, like I still have a lot of things that pop up in my feed in regards to that. And I'm starting to see GraphQL get mentioned more and more in other communities, and I think that that's gonna be the strong point, because there's things that Node is good at, and there are things that Elixir is good at. And I think that the fact that you can easily switch to Elixir when it makes sense, or switch to Cassandra instead of Mongo, or whatever it is you need, like, to me, that is a huge scaling plus side. Because I remember building, I always talk about like working at GoDaddy on the bookkeeping project. And we had this terrible like API development experience, and like it was haphazard and scattered. And the JavaScript front end team was just adding in like little bits that they could, like, they were just rendering bits of data to JSON wherever they could. Like, it was just scattered all over the app, and like it was just a terrible experience. And trying to do the mobile development in iOS, like we were doing native iOS stuff at the time, like it was hard because what they wanted was slightly different than what we wanted. And even though, like, we're still building kind of a similar app, it was slightly different. And it took us a lot of time to kind of align on what the API should look like. And then we had to start versioning it, and like that was a multi-month project, and it was a lot of collaboration between teams. And I think GraphQL just allows you to say, like, here's some data available, and then the mobile team, or the JavaScript front end team for the web, like they can just ask for what exactly they need, and we don't have to worry about any of that stuff. So
Yeah, GraphQL and iFalcor is a very similar, I guess, library that does it very similarly. But I think that they both provide kind of the cleanest abstraction or separation of actually the data itself with the client. So obviously, the data and the client are tightly coupled. Like, I want this view to display this data, but for the client to know, so going back to the stuff like REST, the client has to know how the data is stored in the various REST API endpoints. And that's a kind of coupling that is not very good, because it's hard to change the backend. I mean, you mentioned stuff like versioning. Okay, well, we changed how this API works. Now we have to go change all the clients. And I think that gets really uncomfortable, and it's just not the best developer experience. And so you go to GraphQL, where I mean, you could do static analysis and see, like, okay, we want to eliminate this field in our tree or whatever. You can go say, okay, you still, there is some coupling, but it's a lot looser in the sense where, okay, I want this data, and I don't care where it comes from. So the client no longer has to know where the data comes from. It still has to know the structure of the data. So I think that's a really powerful paradigm. And we've seen companies like GitHub has a public GraphQL API. I think that's huge for 2016.
Yeah, and Shopify.
Yeah.
Another
I
one.
didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's
I'm
cool.
kind of excited about that. I actually have a project that I'm working on that's in working with Shopify API. So
That sounds exciting.
GraphQL instead. And I think, if you look at the flip side, right, like you start to look at things like, what is it? Is it hyper media? Steve Klabnik worked on some stuff. Anyway, there's this idea. I want to say,
Talking like a different protocol.
yeah, different than. Yeah, I think it's hypermedia
I think I've seen
API.
that before.
It was gaining a little bit of steam here and there a while ago, but I don't. I could be wrong on that. But anyway, like, it's the idea that, like, it would give you a list of REST endpoints and kind of describe what you could get, and like then you're able to just say, like, this is the data I need, and it could figure out which REST endpoint to hit. And just look, for any kind of like why GraphQL is bad type posts, and start reading on that, and you'll start to see that there are people playing with other ideas around REST and extending REST. But
Yeah.
I really think, to me, it's part of this is like a mind share thing, right? And this is why I think DDP didn't make sense in the long term for Meteor, is because you really have to change a lot of people's opinions about what an API should look and function like. And I think as a small startup trying to figure out a way to bring in revenue, that's a hard job to do, right? Like that's going to be a hard task. And so like MDG shifting to GraphQL as their data layer made a lot more sense, because you have a large company solving real world problems with their APIs by using GraphQL, and they're handling the part of changing people's minds, right? Like it's not even, I don't even think it's intentional. Like I don't think anyone gave Lee Byron a mandate to say, just go out there and evangelize all the time to everybody so that this can become like the future of like web API standards. But it's definitely happening because they certainly have a platform where everyone's like, well, you know, they're scaling up to a certain level, and like I certainly don't need to scale anywhere to that level, but if this can help fix some of the problems I'm seeing or I might run into, then it starts to become an interesting technology. And like that's, to me, like you're just trying to change people's opinions, give your technology a try, and then it becomes better for everyone that's trying it, because you know we're all working together and hopefully building something great. And so I think that's another reason why I think you should give GraphQL a look, because I don't think, like I haven't necessarily run across or heard any credible alternatives that seem to help and solve a lot of the problems that are out there right now.
Yeah, other than Falcor. I think Falcor and GraphQL are very similar. Well, I think Falcor needs more love. It's not as evangelized, I guess, but I think it's simpler than GraphQL sometimes, and it can be just as powerful. And obviously, Netflix is behind that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So check them both out. I think they're both better than REST for most things. I mean, almost anything I can think of, unless you're doing like some super real time stuff, but then you're still not using REST. So, and now GraphQL has subscriptions, so maybe just GraphQL everything. But I'm a fan, and yeah, I think that's where Meteor's heading. Yeah, I'd love to ask what your. So I know Abhi wrote that post on 10 tips getting off Meteor, and we've talked about a bunch. We've talked a bunch about DDP. What would be your, I guess, best alternative or way of not being as reliant on Meteor when it comes to the real time aspect and DDP? Like if you had to move a project in that direction.
So my answer to that is like I don't need real time. Like I guess I look back and I think like, what things am I needing real time for, right? And let's take Foot Cardigan for example, right? They're selling sock subscriptions. Like maybe you want a little bit of real time because you have a sock inventory, and like they're selling subscriptions, but they also sell like one-off fun socks. And maybe we want a real-time count of how many socks are left, or like how many of a size are left. And like you think maybe like the reason, okay, like I'll just say it, like you have like 3 general things. So if you've ever kind of bought into Cucumber or looked at any of their stuff, like you pop the Y stack and you try to think about like, why am I writing this feature? And generally it comes down to like managing costs, increasing revenue, or protecting revenue. And I think that the hope there is that you're increasing revenue by letting customers know like, hey, you should buy now because it's almost gone. And like that's one little feature. I think I'd almost find a different way to build it. I don't know what the alternative would be necessarily. I haven't looked very deeply, to be honest, because I don't know that it matters all that much. You know, there's apps that matter, like Uber for real time, or like a 2-way chat, but I'm not entirely sold that you need it all the time everywhere. So I don't know. It's an interesting question. I tend to maybe rely on an outside service if I'm going to need that, maybe, you know?
Interesting. Yeah. I was just curious. Because I have an app that's just a little pet app, is a little
Mm,
auction thing, and I haven't put much time into it, but I've been thinking about, because I ran into just weirdness with the Meteor tool, because I was on Meteor 1.1, and I just recently upgraded it to 1.4, so we're good now. But it was just like all this weirdness was happening with 1.1, and I was like, it'd be nice to move this to Webpack and just play around with some stuff. But man, Meteor account system is so nice, as well as just the Insta real time stuff. I was like, I know there's like feathers. I could roll my own with just WebSockets, but yeah, I'm still trying to figure that out. So we'll see.
yeah, I really think, I think in the long term, like, the Meteor development group still sees real time as something that's interesting. I do think that the GraphQL team and the Apollo team will figure something out, and like that'll definitely be an option down the road. And I mean, if you look at the early days of DDP, like it's pseudo real time, right? Like that's the best way we could describe it, because we're not getting the data updates as they change. They were doing a pull and diff, so every 10 seconds they would look at the data that the server was concerned about, that the client cared about, and re-pull it and see if anything changed. And if it did, they would feed that down the pipe. And I mean, you could certainly look at something like that. I think you're right. Feathers is maybe the most interesting there, as far as like if you do need something real time, like that is definitely a major goal of their project for sure. And so we're running out of time on this episode, but we did have some bonus stuff that we'll just kind of mention, I think, that are coming down the pipe. React Fiber, super interesting. Basically, they're re-implementing, I believe, like the way things get rendered in the front end.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, they have a React a reconciler, which I think is a stack based approach. So it's recursive, which is why you get all the really long like warnings and errors in React, where the stacks are like super long. So those should be shortened, which I think is cool and
yeah.
easier from a dev perspective. But it also should up the performance a lot. And I know Inferno. I've seen people on the React team mention if they were to make React from scratch now, they would have made something very similar to Inferno. So that's another kind of React Fiber implementation. And I've seen people on the React team talk about, 2017 will be the year of React Fiber as well as Fiber implementations. So
yeah,
it's really cool.
yeah.
So shout out there.
It looks super interesting, and they just hired the one of the guys that worked created Inferno. They hired on to Facebook, and I'm assuming he's going to work on the React team.
Yeah.
So that'll be kind of interesting to see what shakes out of that. And then I don't know, like styling is a huge question mark still, like in the JavaScript land, like CSS and JavaScript and style guy. I don't even know all the options.
There's like styled components.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of these just different using like template strings, and even inline styles. And there's a lot of debate. If you go to, I forget all the people. I follow a bunch of random people on Twitter that all seem to discuss this all the time, and it's a hot topic. People cannot decide on CSS modules even. So there's a bunch of fun stuff there. Did Sean Larkin ever tweet back at you? Should check that real quick. And then I also got a Josh Owens "Have you gone serverless" email for CreatorConf. So CreatorConf is coming. Everyone should check it out.
Indeed. I'm super excited about that. We got one of the guys that works for serverless, so they got some funding, and he's going to come give a talk, and
Nice.
Super excited about that. No, I didn't get any favorites or anything from Sean Larkin. I did use the hashtag webpack, but it could be, I don't know what part of the world he's in. Maybe he's sleeping.
Yeah, he could be sleeping. It's also New Year's Eve, so
yeah,
it's all good.
Yeah.
We still love you, Sean.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, guys, and tuning in. We will be back next year doing this podcast, keeping it up. If you find it interesting, give us a tweet. Let people know about the show. We don't advertise anywhere. I actually don't even have any advertisers for 2017 at this point. So if you're interested, let me know. And as always, like, keep posting things to Crater. That's where we're going to be getting the news from for each week. So crater.io.
Happy New Year's.
Yep. Same to you, Ben. All right, guys. Bye.
See ya.
This video has been a Space Dojo production. You can click the Learn More button to find out more about us at spacedojo.com. Or you can click the subscribe button to get notified about new videos we put out each week. Thanks for watching.